The illegal market in stolen art is worth around $1 billion a year, second only to the drug trade. Tonight's program investigates this traffic by focusing on one particular story. Since Turkey's invasion and occupation of northern Cyprus in 1974, there has been widespread looting of Greek and Christian artifacts, including the unique mosaics of Kanakaria. For the first time on television, key characters give their own versions of what actually happened to the mosaics. The American dealer, Peg Goldberg, who paid over $1 million for them, and the man from whom she bought them, Michel van Rijn, a former smuggler who was persuaded to cooperate with Omnibus.
In this case, the court is asked to decide the right of possession as between the plaintiffs, the Greek Orthodox Church of Cyprus, and the defendants, Goldberg and Feldman Fine Arts Incorporated, of 4 Byzantine mosaics created in the early 6th century. The mosaics were originally affixed to the Church of Kanakaria on Cyprus, a small island in the Mediterranean.
Οι Τούρκοι ήταν πραγματικά φτωχοί στο χωριό, δούλευαν στους Έλληνες τιμιότατα. Οι σχέσεις μας πραγματικά ήταν άριστες. Είμαστε σε μια μικρή περιοχή, συνορεύαν τα κτήματα μας, κάναμε συνεργασίες. Για όλα είμαστε πάρα πολύ καλοί. Το χωριό μας βρίσκεται στην νότια πτέρυγα της Χερσονήσου της Καρπασίας, βαρούσε προς την νότια πλευρά. Βρισκόταν στους πρόποδας του δάσους Καβάλας από την μια πλευρά και από την άλλη πλευρά είχε τη θάλασσα. Είχε μια πολύ καλή τοποθεσία, είχε πολύ ωραίους κάμπους με τα δέντρα, κατά πράσινα, τα περβόλια του, νερά τρεχάτα αρκετά. Για μας ήταν μια παράδεισος.
Εγώ πήγαινα τακτικά στην εκκλησία από μικρός, και μέσα βαπτίστηκα και μέσα παντρεύτηκα, βάπτισα τα μωρά μου, να πούμε. Ήταν η εκκλησία που πηγαίναμε όλοι οι χωριανοί.
Είμαστε υπερήφανοι διότι είχαμε αυτόν το ωραίο ψηφιδωτό και έρχονταν σχεδόν καθημερινώς τουρίστες και επισκέπτονταν το χωριό μας. Όταν έφτασαν τα τάγκς 18 Αυγούστου, ο κόσμος ήταν κρυμμένος στα σπίτια του, διότι φοβάται. Υποδεχτήκαν τους στην τουρκοκύπρη έξω του χωριού. Είπε ο κοινοτάρχης, ο Τούρκος, ότι υπάρχουν Έλληνες εδώ και δεν θέλουμε να τους ενοχλήσετε, διότι ούτε και αυτοί δεν μας ενόχλησαν 55-63. Μετά σε λίγες ημέρες συγκεντρώσαμε μας στο χωριό, φωνάξαμε μεγάφωνα και ορισμένους έλεγαν τους πηγαίνετε κάτω εσείς, οι άλλοι που δεν θα τους ελαμβάναν εχμάλωτους, λέγαν τους και πήγαιναν στα σπίτια τους. Θα το προτιμούσε, αλλά δεν υπήρχαν δάσκαλοι, δεν λειτουργούσαν σχολεία και ιατροί. Έτσι αυτοί οι λόγοι υποχρέωσαν μας να φύγουμε.
July 15th, 1974 was the day of the coup d'etat against Archbishop Makarios. Every year since then, we hold a memorial service at the church for those who were killed during the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, which occurred on July 20th, 1974. The face of northern Cyprus is Greek since 35 centuries. They erase everything that is Greek, they annihilate everything that is Greek. They have changed the names of all sites, of all villages, of all towns. They have converted our churches, most of them, in mosques, in ammunition stores, in sheepfolds, in cinemas, in bars. Even they were used as latrines. In the churches there were thousands and thousands of icons, sacred vessels, and also ancient gospels. They have all disappeared. This area is a veritable cemetery of our ancient art, and I am sorry to say that it is now at the mercy of looters and thieves.
I went there to buy works of art when there was the war going on between the Turks and the Cypriots, and most of the Turkish people involved, they were Muslims. They didn't like Byzantine works of art or Christian works of art, so many of them were destroyed. So it was a good possibility to get important works out of Cyprus. I think during the war there were stolen about, I think, between 3,000 and 4,000 works of art, not all important, but some of them, of course, like the mosaics, very important.
In the apse of the sanctuary of the church of Kanakaria in Lythrankomi, there is Virgin Mary sitting, having on her laps Jesus Christ in adolescence, and on either of her sides she has the archangel, and round the apse we have the faces of the 12 apostles.
The mosaics date from the 6th century AD. The artistic significance lies in the fact that they are so early in the history of art in Cyprus. And somehow they connect the pagan art of Cyprus with what becomes later the Byzantine and late Byzantine art.
The Christians of the East Mediterranean took an idiom, namely the floor mosaic, and infused it with gold and put it on the walls. But much more important than that even, they invested them with a spirituality by virtue of what's portrayed. So there's something totally new in the history of what we understand as Western culture.
Once these were put on the wall and they were sanctified through the prayers and through the Holy Liturgy and through the services, they are symbols of worship, and we pray to them. The effect on the Byzantine Orthodox believer was great, because by looking on those mosaics, and as he looks on every Byzantine icon, he sees the doctrinal truths instead in a book depicted on the walls.
The icon is not something structural, but rather something theological. It is theology in color. And the whole notion is, and it still is true in the Orthodox world, that the icon by its mere presence, by its very presence, brings the saint into proximity with the supplicant. From the early 8th to the mid-9th century, there was iconoclasm. And then, or during that period of time, it was an express doctrine, law of the Byzantine state to destroy images. Now, Cyprus occupies a rare position at that time, or in that period, by virtue of the fact that it was somewhere between the world of Islam and the world of Byzantium, and it wasn't fought over. It was allowed to be all by itself. So, ironically, of the half-dozen or so mosaic cycles that survive from the East Mediterranean in the early Byzantine period, 3 of them are in Cyprus.
Antiquities are a growing area for collectors. Many people have put a great deal more money into this area than they used to. And this has provided an added incentive to the growing plunder of archaeological sites in many areas around the world. Among them are Central America, where the jungles are filled with early American artifacts, the Buddhist caves of Asia, and the Silk Route, and of course the Mediterranean, where Greek and Roman civilization have left so much of it undiscovered, and sometimes first discovered by the freelance archaeologists rather than the official type.
I worked mostly through the auction houses, through Sotheby's and Christie's, and I bid up prices, and that was my involvement in the icon market, and that's how it started to get spectacular prices. Before the 70s, I think the highest prices were up to £10,000 or something. And then after that, in the 70s, prices were realized 50, 60, £100,000. I mean, for that time, real good prices. When the market became very strong in Byzantine and Christian works of art, and money was at stake, the interest grew. Aydin Dikmen was one of the major dealers who got things out of Cyprus in an unofficial, official way, and I had several deals with him.
The first time I heard the name of Aydin Dikmen was 1966. Aydin Dikmen is the biggest art dealer or smuggler from the North Cyprus. No doubt, it is fact. He sold many things. He sold some artifacts to the Cleveland Museum here. He sold some fake Hacılar pieces to the British Museum, and recently the British Museum had a fake collection, and some of those fakes came from Mr. Aydin Dikmen. And he sold some icons in the Sotheby auctions, and even once the Greek government bought one of them in the auction.
On several occasions, we were obliged to buy our own cultural property, which we found in the hands of the mafia. In other words, pictures were sent to us through middlemen, asking us, are you interested in buying these objects? We could not claim them through legal means because we didn't know who had them.
I'm not surprised why they refused BBC to go and visit the Church of Kanakaria. Why should they let you in? They don't let good faith people go and visit the northern part, the occupied part of Cyprus, because they are afraid of public opinion.
They do not want you to see the destruction carried out deliberately as part of a plan worked out in Ankara and implemented in Cyprus for the annihilation of the national character of Cyprus and the falsification of the historical reality. There are information reaching us from various people who go to the other side and hear and come back and tell us this is so. I would say that we were first informed of the mosaics of Kanakaria.
I asked a young diplomat friend of mine to go and visit the church, and 3 days afterwards he came with a plastic bag containing all the remaining tesserae of the mosaics which you could find on the floor of the church.
They put some very soft plaster on it and then cover it with cloth and cut the mosaics around, pull, okay, let's go, it is finished. That is the way how they work. And they don't care how they ruin the artifacts. It is not their problem.
It was known that Diekman was involved in '82. He was arrested in relation to the Kanakaria mosaics. He stayed one day in prison. His wife flew over. She paid $10,000 to the judge, and he was outside.
In the local Turkish Cypriot press, there were many information published about high-ranking officials of the regime of the other side or of high-ranking nationals from Turkey who were involved in the illegal trafficking of our antiquities.
You can't take 3,000 pieces out of Cyprus without having the major players on the payroll. The military was involved, and they were paid off, and the transports could take place without risks.
When these boxes were not stopped in Turkey or some other places, it goes to Munich airport or Switzerland as an intermediate location. And he puts them into his own, very small items in his apartment in Munich, but mainly in Switzerland.
They were removed from the church by Aydin Diekman, of course. You know, he's a very skillful restorer. And they were brought to Germany, and they were known as being in Germany for quite a few years. I mean, they were known through to the most important dealers in the market, but I didn't think anybody wanted to handle them for a long period because they are such famous pieces. I've been negotiating with Diekman several years on them, and I have various contracts with him, starting I think in '84, and different prices. And you know, finally we realized the deal in the time I did the deal with Goldberg.
I met him when I went to Amsterdam in the Netherlands on other business in late June, early July 1988. I went to examine a Modigliani painting, which another art dealer, Bob Fitzgerald, had contacted me about because I had a client looking for a major Modigliani.
The painting was from one of the major dealers in Holland, but turned out to be a fake. And they were offering at the period about, I think she had a letter of credit with her for $3 million to buy this painting, and when it turned out to be a fake, she was desperately looking for another deal.
Michel proceeded to show me photographs of a number of things that he had available, including photographs of 4 mosaics, kind of sandwiched in the middle of maybe 30 or 40 photographs. Here were these 4 photographs of very, very, very old, pitiful condition pieces, and this one in particular of the 4 photographs just, you know, kind of stopped my heart. It's like I had always known them. I mean, you know, I'd not known them, I'd never seen them, but it struck some sort of a chord in me. Michel von Rijn told me about the origin of the mosaics, that they had come from an extinct church in northern Cyprus, that they'd been found virtually in rubble by an archaeologist, how the mosaics had exited Cyprus to Germany, to Switzerland. I asked about documents that were available. They included an official authorization from the Prime Minister or Director of Culture for Turkey-Cyprus authorizing or granting permission for the pieces to be exported.
Aydin Diekman always faked. He prepared, he arranged some fake documents, fake titles, fake custom papers, and he used the name of the officials, including the Prime Minister of North Cyprus.
I showed her the Damatanox studies of the pieces, and I showed her the photographs from how they were available, in which condition they were.
So she knew exactly what they were and where they'd come from?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to spend this amount of money, you want to know the background, and also there are pieces which are that well known that well, there's no secret about them.
I contacted IFAR, which is basically the International Clearinghouse on pieces that have been reported stolen or missing. And I knew that they interfaced with Interpol and all the other police agencies and customs agencies. And they told me that everything was okay, that there were no, that they'd never been reported stolen or missing.
Ms. Goldberg mentioned in her pretrial papers that she had checked with us and had contacted me unofficially to see if I remembered her contacting us, which I didn't.
Initially, when I expressed an interest, he and Bob Fitzgerald suggested something like $3 million, and I had to be pulled up off of the floor because I didn't have a firm idea in my mind. I was expecting to hear something more in the neighborhood of maybe $250,000. I went to Geneva to finalize my investigation. I was still in the process, basically, of doing that, and to see the mosaics, because I was told that the mosaics were in Geneva. They certainly didn't look as good as the photographs. They were kind of spider-webbed with cracks and crevices, and I reached down to touch one, and it literally crumbled in my hands. When we finished negotiating, the selling price was $1,080,000. The agreement was that Von Rijn and Fitzgerald would receive no commission up front in exchange for 45% of the resale profits, and their attorney would get 5%.
She had a fairly close relationship with the bank president, Nick Frenzel. I mean, she called him up in the middle of the night when she was over in Geneva and said, "Have I got a deal for you?" Within a day, over the 4th of July weekend, Nick Frenzel had arranged the loan. So they were obviously fairly chummy at the first-name basis. And the loan was $1.2 million. It was hurried through the banking bureaucracy.
The amount which was paid from Indianapolis was 1.2, I think, which she kept 140,000, and the rest was paid to Fitzgerald and myself. And out of that money, I paid, of course, Arlene Diekman.
How much did you pay Diekman?
$350,000.
And how much did you make as a total out of the whole deal?
Oh, about, I think a total about close to $1 million, $850,000, something.
When Peg Goldberg got back, she took $70,000 of the monies that she had received of the $1.2 million loan, and she deposited them in various Indiana banks where she had bank accounts. Even before she had purchased the mosaics, she had already arranged with the middlemen for future resale percentage profits. Fitzgerald sold half of their half, which is some 22%, to a physician who paid them another $780,000. Of that, the banker, Frenzel, paid the doctor $390,000. The additional $390,000 for the entire purchase price was financed by the banker's bank. So, Mr. Von Rijn and Mr. Fitzgerald, who never possessed a work of art, have now cleared at least $1.36 million on a deal that cost the bank $1.2 million. And they still don't have the works of art.
And it hasn't really cost the bank $1.2 million because the bank shareholders ended up being so outraged at the whole ball of wax that the bank owner, as it were, the bank president, Nick Frenzel, ended up eating the loan, so to speak, paying for it out of his own personal funds.
Goldberg, when she bought the pieces, she had never seen the works of art. I mean, she just bought them, knowing them from the literature and their background, and she gave the lawyer the order to have them transported. But of course, the lawyer is not somebody who is involved in art, etc. And they were shipped like kartoshkas, like potatoes, and of course, they arrived broken in the United States.
Well, they came in tatters, if that's possible, and they were handed over to a fellow named Myron Borax, who is a freelance art conservator, who admitted he'd never done any kind of restoration work on mosaics before, but he figured, what the hell can you do to glass and plaster? You can't really destroy it. So he pieced it together as best he might and infilled a mosaic pattern with wax where he wasn't quite sure. To that extent, I don't think he really damaged them, but they would obviously need to be professionally restored.
I had hoped very much to keep the Archangel once I determined it was the Archangel. That's the one I wanted to keep for myself. And my concern was if we placed them at auction that they might be split up, and I really didn't personally like that idea because they'd come to be my friends at this point. And so we decided that we wanted to start by approaching a couple of major museums.
We discussed how to handle them, and I mean, the move she made afterwards, because she couldn't wait to sell them to the Getty Museum. I mean, I've been a dealer for 20 years. I think I know my way to the Getty Museum, and you know, so I thought that it was very unprofessional. I mean, they should have been sold privately, or she should have entered a negotiation with the Cypriots up front.
I found out then that they were worth maybe $20 million. That was based on what we had been told by both a representative from Sotheby's and by the president of another auction house, that they believed the mosaics would fetch.
And she went to an auction house here, which is Habsburg and Feldman, Geza von Habsburg, and through Geza she tried to sell them to the Getty Museum.
He had told me these mosaics were legally exported from Cyprus, and so he'd sent me the name of the company that exported them, and I realized it was from the north of Cyprus. And then he sent me the title page of a book by Ernest Hawkins and Magall on these mosaics, published by Dumbarton Oaks. And I was surprised that mosaics so recently published would be available for purchase. I called Vassos Karagiorgis in Oxford. Vassos was spending the fall semester at Merton College in Oxford, and I telephoned him there.
My first reaction was to inform the Department of Antiquities in Cyprus, asking them to find a good lawyer and start proceedings for the recovery of the mosaics.
We decided, as soon as we had any information that could ground a claim, to bring people before the court. Goldberg was the first one.
Their first demand was that I simply give them the mosaics. In exchange for that, they would give me a thank you note. That was not on a list of things that I had any interest in doing. And I don't think anybody else would have under the circumstances. So we fought.
We had three major defenses in the case. The first defense was that we believed that the case should be governed by the law of Switzerland, and under Swiss law, a purchaser can take good title to personal property, even if it turns out the property is stolen. The second major defense was simply that Cyprus took too long to bring this claim. We believed that, properly analyzed, the lawsuit had to be brought within 6 years after the mosaics were removed from the church. And if that were true, then the statute of limitations expired in 1985. The third defense was simply that the Church of Cyprus and the government of Cyprus did not have title to the mosaics. Under the law of the Turkish Federated State of Cyprus, the mosaics were no longer owned, if they ever were, by the Church of Cyprus and by the government of Cyprus.
She alleged that they were legally exported. Of course, she should have known that that part of Cyprus is an illegal state, and the only government which is recognized by the whole nation is the Republic of Cyprus. But it seems that Goldberg did not care at all about these things. What she cared was to buy these mosaics and sell them a few weeks later, making 20 times as much profit as she had bought them.
They took an opportunity to try to make a political scenario in the United States that they picked well. I believe, without any question whatsoever, that they knew Ideen Dickman, that they'd known him for many years, that they had done business with him, that they knew that he had the Kanakaria mosaics. One of the most unbelievable pieces of evidence was not produced by us, but was produced by Greek Cyprus as a part of our document request, and that was the headlines in an article from June of 1982 in the Turkish Cypriot newspaper, Ortam. And the headline, what there is there's an article about like this. There are two headlines. The top headline says, "The Stolen Kanakaria Mosaics." And then here are photographs of 3 of my 4 mosaics. And below that is a subhead, and it says, "Antiquity smuggler Ideen Dickman arrested in connection with church thefts." That was in Greek Cyprus's own files. And how difficult was Ideen Dickman to find? We produced at trial phone books from Munich, Germany. They knew that the man was in Munich, Germany.
An experienced dealer in antiquities, which Ms. Goldberg was not, could have done a number of things to check out these mosaics. She knew that they were rare. She felt that they were genuine, although I gather she didn't check with authorities on that. And I would say that as rare as mosaics of this early date are, that if you went to the library and you knew where to look, within 2 days you would have found out which apse was their true home.
She never contacted any agency, like the UNESCO, or anybody at all, to make sure about these mosaics, whether they were stolen or they were legitimately in the hands of Dickman, who was a Muslim. The very fact that Dickman was a Muslim should have alerted her and made her think twice how a Muslim had in his possession these Christian jewels.
It is ordered, adjudged, and decreed that possession of the mosaics at issue in this case is awarded to the plaintiff, the autocephalous Greek Orthodox Church of Cyprus.
I expected the court decision to come down during the week I was in Nicosia. Fortunately, it did. The president, Georgios Vasiliou, as well as the archbishop, were both in town at one ceremony commemorating the 12th anniversary of the death of Makarios, the archbishop. We went to the theater in downtown Nicosia. Vasiliou was just finishing some presentation. He was coming down the aisle, coming out into the lobby of the auditorium. I stood there speaking through 3 or 4 different translators. All, of course, was unnecessary because he spoke English. I said, well, congratulations. The case has been decided. Judge Nolan has ruled that the mosaics are yours. He said, wow, this is great. Wait right here. He ran up half a flight of stairs because the archbishop was coming down. He said, blah, 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 blah. They talked about it. They came back. He said, whoa. Walked back into the auditorium, said, stop the presses, basically. Got back up on stage. He said, ladies and gentlemen, this is all in Greek. I have some great news. The decision has been handed down. The mosaics are ours. At which point, 2,000 people gathered in this auditorium, stood up and started cheering. It was a big deal. Oh my gosh, it was great. It was front page news. I went back to the hotel. Everybody, they were talking about it, come over the radio or whatever. Taxi cab drivers the next day. I say, well, did you hear about this? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it was a big thing. I mean, this was obviously foremost in their minds.
For the Cypriots, in particular, this Indianapolis trial made our case internationally known. That is, that the cultural property of Cyprus did suffer as a result of the Turkish invasion of Cyprus and the occupation of this part of the island. And it also made more conscious the Cypriots of what they are losing and what they have lost already with regard to their cultural property.
Με χαρά μας και αγαλίαση ακούσαμε εκ των υστέρων ότι ανεβρέθησαν μερικά από αυτά στην Αμερική. Και κάθε βράδυ καθόμαστε στην τηλεόραση να ακούσουμε τι γίνεται και τι εξελίξεις είχαμε. Η επιθυμία μας όλων, και χωριανών και ξένων και των γειτόνων του χωριού, είναι να επαναφέρουμε αυτά τα μοσαϊκά στην Κύπρο και εμείς οι ίδιοι να αναστηλώσουμε αυτά εκεί που ήτανε και εκεί που τους αρμόζει.
Broadly speaking, it's as if this decision was a very loud noise in a very small room, and the noise has made a lot of people nervous. It makes the dealers nervous, it makes the trustees nervous, and that makes the curator and the museum director nervous, and that's all good. Our whole center of gravity on the antiquities issue is shifting. And you see it in the newspapers all the time, the cycladic material that came up for auction in Sotheby's and in London in July. Now, granted, the sale went forward, but still, the whole idea that a hoard that had gone through the trade as early as the 50s or early 60s could still now be subject to litigation, that is a good sign. And I think the momentum is building.
100,000 is bid, 110, 120, 130, 140, 140,000, then 150,000, 160, 200,000. 200,000 pounds and 210,000, 220,000, 230,000.
The general message that this judgment sends to the rest of the world is that these treasures belong to the place where they come from, irrespective of the smallness of the state. Cyprus is a very small state in geographical dimensions, but it is great in cultural dimensions.
First of all, the mosaics are still here in Indianapolis, pending an appeal. We argued that case on January 16th, and as we sit here today, we still haven't received a decision. from that court. So the case is on appeal.
One of the puzzles, I think, of this whole case is how is it that objects which in the fall of 1988 are supposedly saleable for $20 million, sitting in somebody's apartment for 9 or 10 years? Well, the truth of the matter was, in '88, as it was in 1979, that these are unsaleable objects. It's as if you have stolen the child of a president and go on the street trying to peddle that child for adoption. He may be pretty, he may be smart, but nobody's going to want him. And that's true now as ever. And I was puzzled by this idea that if on some technicality Peg Goldberg may have won the case for whatever bizarre reason, that somebody would then turn around and buy them. I cannot imagine anybody wanting to touch these.
There are a couple of pieces more. One of is the St. Thomas, one of is Andrew, and the feet of Christ. So I think it's a pity that a unique piece like this, I mean, it's one probably of the earliest depictions of Christ in Byzantine art, is split, and one part is at the moment somewhere in Europe, and the other part is in the United States.
Do you know where the two apostles are?
Yes. I know where they are, and I hope to be able to, you know, to bring them out in the open market, either return them to Cyprus or have them, depending on the verdict in the United States, have them in the United States. I think they should be reunited, and at least they should be in a place where people they can admire them and see them.
The recovery of the mosaics of Kanakaria Church was very important to us because we cannot see our spiritual treasures outside in the market to be sold as objects just for commerce. This is for us very serious sin for those that they sell them, and for us if we don't react against this action. They are not in their natural environment. Their place is in the church. They are our spiritual treasures.
Στο παιδί μπαξίσει, 5 τα λίρα χρυσά, άιντε να μου τραγουδήσει, γιος μυρνεϊκά παλιά. Να μου τον πεις τον άμανε, και ας πεθάνω μάτωνε. Εγώ είμαι πρόσφυγας, ξεριζωμένος, Lythrankomi την καπαλιά νουρισμένος. Εγώ είμαι πρόσφυγας, ξεριζωμένος, Lythrankomi την καπαλιά νουρισμένος. Κι όσα έχω αποκτήσει, πρόσφυγας στη ξένη γη, σου